Well,
so basically, tonight I was going to talk about, you know, in an intro to our discussion about Karl Marx's heritage, where Karl Marx came from, and then how that led up to the creation of the First International, and then how the First International fell apart. So the first thing you have to remember about Karl Marx is that he was way ahead of his time. He came about in a revolutionary period that was actually, it was inertia of the bourgeois revolutions that were going on all around the world. You had the French Revolution, well, mainly through Europe, the English Revolution. English was still in a period of revolt. The German workers were in revolt. And the basis for the various bourgeois revolutions was these various universal human values kind of talking. In France, the slogan of the revolution was fraternity,
liberty, fraternity, equality.
Equality. Well, that all sounds nice, but there's no class basis to any of this. And one of the first broad working class movements in England was the Chartists, and they were a group of people, and they had a 4-point platform. They wanted the right to vote for all men, no matter if they owned property or nothing. They wanted the right to a secret ballot, so your employer couldn't fire you for voting wrong. And they wanted no property restrictions or poll taxes or ways of preventing that. And their final thing is they wanted the elections to be every year. They wanted them to be regular elections. They couldn't just be whenever the people in Parliament decided, oh, let's have another election.
Now, what year are we talking about?
We're talking the 1790s.
1790s.
Early 1800s, and it was a working class movement because all these revolutions had been fought on the understanding that people would be winning, this liberty, equality, and fraternity, but the working class didn't get any of it.
It seems to me that you do have class basis of these revolutions. It's not a working class basis,
right?
But you have the merchant class, the rising merchant class is rebelling against the feudal landowner class.
Yes.
And so there's certainly a class basis to the revolution. It's just not a working.
And so the bourgeoisie, in order to bring down the monarchy, was forced to put all of society into motion. Every bum and all of that was out on the streets with them and encouraged to rise up. After the French Revolution, you had two factions that ended up running Paris for a period. You had the Jacobins, which were the radicals, and their program was to invade the rest of Europe and bring the revolution to the rest of Europe.
Which Napoleon did subsequently.
Right, that was later. And then you had the Girondists, were the right-wing faction, that they wanted to compromise with the nobles around the world and just kind of say, okay, we'll get back to the way things were. And the Jacobins were the radical faction. Some of them even began calling for something other than just capitalism, because they started seeing that the nobility was being replaced by the rich. That every factory, the factory owner was becoming the new nobility, and had all the rights. And the Jacobins, they took the slogans liberty, fraternity, equality seriously, and out of them.
Interesting that the bourgeoisie had to rile up the masses in order to get anything done. I mean, they couldn't do anything without us even then.
Right. Of course.
We have fought all of their wars, in fact.
Yes.
Right. And the first working class movements were the inertia following the bourgeois revolutions, really. And out of that, you had a gentleman named Louis Auguste Blanc. Okay, and Blanc. He was a figure who saw that the ruling class and the bourgeoisie were a problem, and so his solution was that they needed to have another coup d'etat, and he was going to get together with his buddies, and they were going to storm the Bastille again and take over and do something socialistic. You had Robert Owen in England, who was talking about he was a very moralistic Christian kind of figure, and it was that capitalism. Look, there's people starving. This isn't what God wanted. Let's share and feed the sheep.
That was already later, and he started a colony in Indiana.
New Harmony. New Harmony, right?
New Harmony, sure.
Sharing, the word that the bourgeoisie has always hated.
Right. Know what I'm talking about?
I
don't.
S-A-N-S, which means without in French. Culotte.
Shoes. Yeah.
L-O-T-T-E-S, is without shoes. In other words, the poor.
Right.
The poor, the sans-culottes, were very important in the French Revolution. They are the ones who provided the Jacobins with their power.
Thing going on, and it wasn't until Napoleon came in, and that was what they called the Thermidor, when when Napoleon stepped in and halted the revolution, and he reinstated the Catholic Church. Prior to that, the French Revolution, they had converted all the churches to temples of reason, where they would get together and have scientific lectures. Lectures by scientists. And Napoleon came in, he reinstated the Catholic Church. He reinstated himself as a monarch. But he kept the capitalist system. He didn't restore feudalism. Capitalism remained intact. The merchants remained intact. He's the one who coined the term meritocracy, meaning that you're the best, you get the most. It's not based on who your parents are. It's based on how hard you work. It's the bourgeois theory. That was Napoleon, and he halted the revolution, but he didn't overturn it.
Meritocracies. Now I know why.
Yeah.
But he actually spread it through all of Europe.
And he began the invasions.
It went on with the
revolution. I mean, they had called numerous times for people to go out into the streets and defend, and defend the bourgeoisie, the new, mercantile class, against the monarchy. And so, about the time the bourgeoisie was setting up its power and replacing the bourgeois, replacing the monarchs and the nobles of the past, the workers were still in motion all across the world, and you started having these new theories of, something's wrong with capitalism. There's something not right here, because we were supposed to get liberty, equality, fraternity, and brotherhood and all of that, and instead we're getting, we're back where we were. We're still starving. Now, the merchants, now they're running the show, and we're still suffering. The 1848 revolutions, all through Europe, there were countless revolutions. Every country in Europe had at least 2 or 3 revolutions that year. And Karl Marx first came into prominence. He was a soldier in that revolution, in the German 1848 revolt. And his group of followers were the Communist League. And they said that they needed to get beyond, equality, brotherhood, fraternity, and even among the socialists, he was a dissident, because he didn't want socialism on the understanding of it's just, it's this nice idea, it's best for everybody. He understood that there was this new class that had been created. As the bourgeoisie and the monarchs, or not the monarchs, but the bankers and the industrial and the feudalists had come into existence, a new class had been created of people who have nothing to sell but their labor. They don't own anything. They own nothing but their ability to sell their labor. They're the proletariat, he called them. And this new class, he argued, was exploited under the new system, and that they needed to bring down the old system, the new system that had been created of capitalism, which had replaced feudalism. And he argued that they were the basis for that, and he formed the Communist League. And their declaration of existence in 1848 was called the Communist Manifesto. Actually, he edited a newspaper that was a radical paper, and he was put on trial for distributing this newspaper, and found guilty, and he fled Germany to England, where his associate in the Communist League, Frederick Engels, and Frederick Engels' father had owned factories, textile factories in England, and so he had fled there. And there was already a labor movement growing in Britain. And the end of the Communist Manifesto, he calls for workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains, and the world to win. It's that first, and then workers of the world unite. But and when he made that call, I mean, he had envisioned that the workers all over the world would unite into an organization that would fight in their interests, not just in individual countries.
And it's proletarians of the world unite. It's not workers either.
Yeah.
What?
Proletarians of the world.
The idea was to unite, the organizations into, and that before there had been an international, before there was even talk of creating an international group of workers, there had already been an international counter-revolution. The capitalists were already meeting all around the world. What are we going to do about these unions that are forming? What are we going to do to suppress them? The most workers who were in the organization.
English wool.
It was English workers, because there was a trade union movement in English going strong, because England had been the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. And it was England, especially the textile industry. Textile, that was the center of of that industry was in Britain, and there were strikes going on all across the country. And that between the two conflicting groups within it. And there was one section that was trade unionists, organizers, people fighting for justice, people going around demonstrating and all that. And then there was another section that was intellectual figures who were really kind of absent from the class struggle entirely, led by Bakunin, followers of the then deceased Blanc, LaSalle, and there were these intellectuals who most of them were from the nobility class. They were not actually workers, but they were former nobles who'd been usurped, and they came from that and they had kind of a utopian vision. And that was the fight that raged and actually eventually killed the First International.